I will never forget the day I crossed the threshold of that house. My name is Elena, and my profession is that of a caregiver, a guardian angel for those who have lived long enough to witness the world change 1,000 times. That summer, my task was to assist a sweet 80-year-old grandmother who had decided to retire to her countryside home in Calabria to escape the city's heat, where childhood memories populated every corner like benevolent ghosts. The grandmother wasn't a woman of many words, but in her eyes, there were stories that went beyond my understanding. The house was an ancient stone building, hidden among the green folds of the hills, a place that seemed carved directly into the memories of the land. Turning to the grandmother, I said, "It's a very old house, ma'am. You can feel that it has witnessed many summers." She replied, "Oh, yes. Every wall has a story, and every ceiling has borne the dreams and sorrows of those who lived beneath it." On the evening of my arrival, the house was immersed in such a profound silence that you could almost hear the rustle of time passing. As the grandmother retired to her rooms, I remained alone with the creaking noises of the house, which began to speak in the incomprehensible language of the night. When the moon was high, and the outside world was nothing more than a distant echo, the silence was broken by faint whispers. Voices that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves spoke in a symphony of murmurs that sent shivers down my spine. It can't be, I thought. It's just the old wood creaking, or the wind playing through the cracks, right? But reason is sometimes a feeble defense against the darkness that creeps into our minds. And that night, darkness seemed to want to befriend me, or perhaps something more sinister. I was no stranger to stories of old houses with their characteristic moans and creaks, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. Silence was a constant companion in that dwelling, but it was broken by something I couldn't explain. They weren't just the noises of the house settling into the cool of the night, they were whispers, distorted words that insinuated themselves into the dark corridors, approaching and then receding like the breath of someone playing hide and seek with your sanity. I got out of bed, my heart pounding in my throat, and turned on the light. Nothing. The surroundings seemed the same, still and silent. Yet, the air was charged with a tension that sent shivers down my spine. The next day, I mustered the courage to broach the subject with the grandmother. "Ma'am, last night, I heard noises, voices. Is there someone hiding in the house?" She replied, "Oh, dear, these old walls speak in the language of memories. But there's no one here except us, I can assure you." I wasn't convinced by the grandmother's response, but I didn't want to appear as a silly woman frightened by shadows. However, the feeling that something or someone was hiding just out of my sight accompanied me throughout the day. The following evening, after making sure the grandmother was asleep, I decided to leave a small light on, hoping it would keep the darkness and whatever lurked within it at bay. But as soon as my eyes closed, the whispers began again, this time closer, more personal, as if they wanted to tell me something. "There's nothing there, Elena," I repeated to myself, trying to convince myself that I was only a victim of my imagination. "Tomorrow, I'll talk to the grandmother. I need to uncover the truth behind these sounds." But as I wrapped myself in the blankets, seeking protection, a clearer voice emerged from the confused chorus, a voice that couldn't be ignored. It was a whisper, sweet and terrifying at the same time, saying a name that I felt as if it had been etched into the very wall of the room. The next day was steeped in an even heavier silence. The sun filtered weakly through the old shutters, as if even light were afraid to enter too deeply into those walls. While the grandmother went about her daily chores, I saw her do something that I couldn't understand at the time. With a small glass, she poured water at specific points in the house, murmuring words that I couldn't catch. When our eyes met, she stopped, almost caught off guard. I immediately asked her, "What are you doing, ma'am?" And she replied, "Oh, nothing much, dear. Just some old habits to keep the mold away. This house is old, and dampness is always lurking." I wasn't convinced. I had seen how the water had touched the wall, almost in a gesture of blessing or protection. There was something amiss, something hiding behind those gestures and the nightly voices. My nights became torment. The whispers wouldn't let me rest, and my mind began to play tricks on me. Shadows moving just beyond my sight, cold touches brushing my skin as I traversed the dark hallways to reach my room. I thought, I must uncover what's happening in this house. I must know if these are just sounds of my imagination or if there's something more. The decision was made one morning after another sleepless night. I would talk to the townsfolk. Someone must know, someone might provide a logical explanation. I approached one of them. "Excuse me, I wanted to ask you about the house of the lady I'm working for. Have strange things happened in the past?" The elderly man, with a frightened look, replied, "Oh, dear. That house has seen more shadows than the daylight could ever tell. There's a story that nobody wants to remember." The conversation with the village elder took place in the dimness of the church, the only place where they seemed safe enough to reveal secrets buried by time. As the candles flickered like the voices that narrated the story to me, the puzzle began to take shape. The elder continued, 30 years ago, a child from the village died in a tragic accident right behind your room. He was a poor angel, whose life was taken by the very animal he was supposed to feed." I replied, "A child? But how is that possible?" The elder responded, "It was a terrible accident. The pig choked him with its chain. It was nobody's fault, but the house absorbed that despair, that sorrow." The words of the elder hit me like a stab to the heart. The story of the child, the presence I felt, the whispers, everything was starting to connect into a gruesome mosaic I never wanted to complete. That night, as I lay down in bed, the sounds were different. No longer mere whispers, but the muted crying of a child, a lament that tore at my soul. It was as if the veil between the past and the present had grown thin, allowing the emotions of that tragic event to spill into the room. This house is not just a structure of stones and wood, it's a container of emotions, a place where the past has not found peace, I thought. That child, his soul is still here, trapped in a limbo of pain and confusion. The following nights were a torment. Every dark corner seemed to hide the gaze of that child, every nocturnal echo was his breath. The house was alive with his presence, and all I could do was listen and suffer along with him. I confronted the grandmother one last time, with tears in my eyes and a heavy heart. "Do you know about the child, don't you? Do you know he's still here?" She, with teary eyes, told me. "Yes, I do. That's why I come back here every summer, to not leave him alone, because no child should remain alone in the dark. The nights that followed were the longest of my life. Each twilight brought with it a sense of apprehension that grew into terror. The presence of the child was palpable, as if I could reach out and touch the coldness of his despair. And somehow, my soul seemed to be tied to his, as if I had taken on the role of a guardian of a ghost. One night, the wind howled louder than usual, and the house groaned under the weight of an invisible storm. That's when I felt something different, a shiver in the air, a sort of anticipation charged with energy. You're here with me. I feel you, and you feel me. I turned on the lamp next to the bed, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. And then I saw him, for a moment so brief I could have believed it was an illusion, but it was real. A shadow, small and trembling, reflected in the window overlooking the garden. I began to speak. Is that you, little one? I'm here to help you. My words, spoken in a hushed voice, seemed to have an effect. The air grew colder, and the feeling of not being alone intensified. The flickering light of the lamp seemed to battle against darkness that sought to claim the room. And then, a sound, a sigh, as light as a falling leaf. It was the release of years of pain, a farewell that no one had ever heard. In that moment, I understood that my role was not just to be a caregiver for the grandmother, but also a witness for the child who had never found peace. When dawn swept away the shadows, I knew that everything had changed. The grandmother and I shared a silent understanding. We were no longer alone, and perhaps we never had been. The wind that night had a haunting cry, as if carrying with it the cries of all lost souls. The house was a frantic heartbeat, and every step I took echoed like a war drum against the wooden floor. The whispers were no longer whispers, they were wails, muffled cries that found me wherever I hid. When the light escaped the lamp, I found myself in the darkest darkness, my breath the only sound in the stifling room. That's when I felt a presence, not behind me, not in front of me, but inside me. A freezing cold enveloped my heart, and a child's voice whispered in my ear with a tone that was a mix of innocence and horror. I heard the child's voice, "Why didn't anyone save me?" At that point, I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. Fear had paralyzed me, and I knew I couldn't spend another minute in that house. And so, when the first rays of morning light broke through the cracks in the shutters, I gathered the few belongings I had unpacked and, without waking the grandmother, rushed out the door. The village was deserted at that hour, and the only sound was the hurried pace of my footsteps on the cobblestone road as I made my way to the bus stop. I didn't look back, not once. When the bus arrived, with its reassuring mechanical hum, I boarded without hesitation. As the village shrank to a dot behind me, I still felt the weight of that presence that had spoken to me in the night. But now there was also a sense of guilt for leaving the grandmother, a guilt that would haunt me forever. I had abandoned my duty, but I knew, as far as I was concerned, that house was no longer a place of life but a monument to the pain and terror that some souls can never leave behind. As the bus moved along the winding road through the hills, a veil of morning mist concealed the view of the house behind me. In my heart, an ongoing struggle. The relief of leaving that suffocating presence behind, and the remorse for leaving the grandmother to a fate I couldn't even imagine. So, I began to reflect. I thought I could provide comfort, help. But there are forces in this world that go beyond our understanding, presences we can neither save nor redeem. I finally left that place, but the part of me I lost will always remain in that room, whispering in the dark. As the first rays of the sun broke the dawn's grayness, I realized that some stories are not meant to find a conclusion, some mysteries do not want to be unraveled. And you, dear viewers, what would you have done in my place? Would you have found the courage to stay, or, like me, would fear have driven you to flee? If this story has touched you, if shivers have run down your spine, and you've found yourself looking suspiciously at the shadows in your room, then please like and subscribe to the channel for more stories. Stories that will keep you awake at night, stories that will make you wonder what truly lurks in the darkness.